So, I have quite a few stories to tell about this game in particular, and in fact, thinking about it is quite interesting because it really brings to light just how early I actually did get my PS2. Around 2000, I didn't have a PS2. And I know there was a time where I've talked about this before where I didn't have a PS2 but the PS2 was out, and I mentioned this when I talked about Jack and Daxter, I think. I mentioned this when I talked about Theme Park World, and I mentioned this when I talked about Robot Wars Arenas of Destruction, where I saw this PS2 at my dad's house and I wanted one. But what's strange is thinking about this is that I got my PS2 in 2001 or summer 2001, and I know this because there's a few stories that line up with this. But really, it really brings to light how short that space was. But the reason I mention that is because this particular game is the first game I got on my PS2, and it was the only game I got with my PS2. Yeah, I mentioned before also that with Dave Mira's BMX2 and Armored Core 2, I got those as my second and third game together when we went to Newcastle that one time, but this is a game that I first got on my PS2. But this is also quite interesting because I already had this game on the PS1 before this, and so there was kind of this generational leap where I did play this game across two different generations, but the game was clearly the same game. But whilst playing the PS1 version during that time, I was hearing things and aware about things for the PS2 version that I had heard some people at school talk about, and so this game I did get with my PS2, and when I played this game I was quite amazed at how smooth and detailed the graphics were, as you usually would be when you get a new console. And so this game is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about my memories of the PS1 game, because there's a few things that make the PS1 game different to the PS2 game, aside from the obvious graphics. For one, the second and the second last level, which is Los Angeles and Canada, they flipped round. So on the PS1 version, you would have Los Angeles second and Canada second last, and then on the PS2, they flipped those levels around. And I did get the impression whilst playing this game on the PS1 when I had it on the PS1, that even though I liked it, it was kind of disappointing in a way because I kind of expected more of it. I expected more variety with the skaters. One of the features that I was aware of was that the vert skaters and the street skaters now had their own different challenges. So for example, a street skater may have grind this rail, whilst the vert skaters may have cannonball over the half pipe. And each character didn't really feel all that nuanced. They felt like it was much stricter. So for example, the right and circle ability, if they were a street skater, it would be indie, but if they were a vert skater, it would be cannonball, and it was very clear cut. Like, you got this one character, or rather this one set of characters here, and this other set of characters here, and that's how they differentiate, apart from the specials of course. And the music was alright. The only real band that stuck with me since then was Reverend Horton Heat, and even then, they're not amongst my very favourites, but there was quite a few decent songs on that game. But also, my main memory of the PS1 version is it being all snowy outside and not feeling very well as I was playing it. But I eventually did get on the PS2 when I got my PS2, and I was amazed at the graphics and just how smooth everything was. I was amazed at how smooth the intro video was, and all of the videos of all the different skaters for when you complete the game. They are longer, and some of them talk during their video, and I was just generally impressed with the capabilities of the PS2 at that time. Also, a feature that stood out with Tony Hawk's 3 was that you gained stats by collecting them. There are actually stat points that you could find around each level, and each level also had a deck that you could find. So there was a lot more in terms of going to find things that you had to collect, which would then be used to improve your stats and your decks and all that lot. I also remember, now this is quite a bit of a story here, my friend JP had Tony Hawk's 3, or at least he said he had Tony Hawk's 3, I wasn't too sure, and I remember sending him texts asking him questions such as how do you get the deck on Los Angeles, because I could see it but I didn't know how to get there. So I sent him texts and asking him questions and stuff, and then one day I got this call and it was like this fully grown man, and he was just saying, "Oh, hello there, I think you got the wrong number. Yeah, you're asking about this deck in Los Angeles, were you?" And Yeah, it was quite embarrassing because I was talking about a game, but this guy rang me, perhaps thinking I was a tourist or something, asking about something in Los Angeles. This is really strange. But the big memory I have of this game that really stands out to me as an amazing moment, not as strong of a memory overall, but one that just stands out to me as being really, really strange and unique, is that we did once play, me and JP, against each other on Trick Attack, that being the mode where you just have to go around and get the most points. And we played a 10-minute round on the Foundry, and we both got like couple million points, but I won by 3 points. Not 3,000 or 30 or anything, 3 points exactly. And there was a time where I got really good at Tony Hawk games. That is until everyone afterwards got better as well, and then suddenly everyone caught up skill-wise. But one of the big memories I have about the PS1 version of the game specifically is that I created this custom skater and fully maxed out his stats, and with all the cheats turned off, I remember trying to get as much points as possible to see how high of a score I could get, and the biggest thing I remember is on the airport level, I managed to get a combo of 900,000, which is loads. I remember like thinking to myself, this is absolutely amazing. It involved at the very start going down the whole way, and then at the very, very last quarter pipe at the very end of the airport doing a 900 and then landing at a revert. And yeah, reverts, they were a new thing in Tony Hawk 3, weren't they? So vert skaters could actually build up a combo, so you could fall down from a quarter pipe and then do a revert and continue on the line of tricks. Of course, now you can go onto YouTube and see people getting millions of points in a combo, so it doesn't really stand out, but it did to me back then. This game is a part of a big, well-established, well-known, very popular series, but this was sort of my first introduction to the series. But what's interesting is that when I got this game, and for a good long time whilst I played it, I had absolutely no idea that this was part of a big series. In fact, I thought it was probably just a one-off game. But when I was little and I used to go shopping with my mum, sometimes she would let me get a game, and this was one of those times. And I remember being in Woolworths, which is now B&M. Not that Woolworths became B&M, but this particular store, which was Woolworths, became B&M. But yeah, we're at this Woolworths, and I was looking at the Game Boy games, and I saw this one, and I just thought, that looks interesting. And so I decided to get it. I decided to get The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. And like I said, I had absolutely no idea what Zelda was. And yes, I did call Link Zelda because I was ignorant of that topic at that time, and I didn't know anything about the character of Zelda, I didn't know anything about the Triforce or anything like that. In fact, this game doesn't focus on Zelda or the Triforce, but rather you wake up on this island, and the idea is that you want to escape the island. And so you start with your shield, and you have to go around and explore the world, assigning different items to the A and B button, as you did do in these old Zelda games with only the two main buttons. And it was basically like an adventure, and I really liked that. I found that really appealing. I remember seeing the map and seeing the map reveal as you went round, and you could see how many places you still had to go to yet. That was very nice. But you go to get the shield, and then the owl comes down and tells you stuff, and as you play you can explore more of the area as you would. And I realise I'm talking about very basic Zelda stuff here because really, like I said, this was my first experience with the Zelda game, so this is how I was introduced to it. You do go to the first dungeon as you usually would and complete all of the different puzzles in order to get to the end and find the instrument at the end, and you also get a heart container extending your health total. And I was just really kind of blown blown away by the fact that the further that you go in the game, the more that the world opens up to you. So, like I said, you can go through the first dungeon and you will get the item, and then you could use that item to explore different areas around the world. And so these items include a bracelet which will allow you to pick up heavy objects, shoes that will allow you to run, a feather that will allow you to jump over pits, and a grappling hook where you can grab things and use that to pull you along to another side. And you also get the ability to swim and all sorts of different increased methods of transportation. And I really liked going through all of the other caves and finding all of the different heart pieces, and I did get lost quite a bit. And I also remember how you can eventually buy a shovel and use that to be able to dig things up from the ground. And you also had the different collectibles as well, such as the secret seashells, where it kind of just gave you a vague message saying that if you collect so many, something good is bound to happen, even though it wasn't clear as to what that actually meant. But yeah, I kind of feel like I am just listing stuff here, and I'm not really talking about any of the core mechanics. But I will list at least one more thing that comes to mind, and that is the trading game thing, where you have to find an item and then give that item to someone who will then give you another item, who you have to use that to give that to someone else, and so on and so forth. And I don't remember what the whole aim of that is, but I don't remember if I did complete that. I didn't actually complete the game. I remember getting to one of the, I believe it was one of the later dungeons, and I kind of just got stuck. It may have been the key themed dungeon, I'm not so sure. But I remember I did really get into it, and I really did like the whole thing about getting new items to be able to explore new areas and finding different places with different heart pieces and different secret items and stuff. And it was a lot of fun, and it was quite a bit after playing this game that I saw Ocarina of Time, where I saw that there was more than one Zelda game. And then it was quite a long time after that again when I found out that Zelda is actually a big franchise and I had only played this one game. So yeah, I kind of just got this game on a whim because it looked decent when I was a kid. The box enticed me enough, and I'm glad that I did because I certainly had a lot of fun with it. So this is a game that I believe I got pretty early on in my PS1 days, although I also think that I had a demo of this game before I actually had this game. The demo itself wasn't of the very first level, I think it was sort of like the second level, and it was kind of intriguing because, again, you have to remember this is when the whole PS1 3D thing was still very new to me. And so this was my first real experience with playing a game, or at least a demo of a game, where it sort of took advantage of not just the 3D graphics, but the 3D environments and used that for a sort of adventure gameplay style. Because of course you have all of the Metroidvanias in the 2D realm, and you also have the top-down RPGs and adventure games in the 2D realm. But this was the first time that I can recall really playing a game where the 3D graphics allowed you to really interact with the world in this sort of way that involves depth. I don't mean gameplay-based depth here, I just mean like dimensional depth, and allowed you to utilize that to solve puzzles. And I am talking about the original Tomb Raider. I am not talking about the 2013 new one. No, I'm talking about the original. And I really like this game. The core idea behind this game, well, there's this whole story about the creation of Tomb Raider and how they wanted it to be a sort of like an Indiana Jones type thing, apart from with a female main character. But I really felt that this game, this world in this game, had a element of depth to it. And again, I am meaning in that sort of dimensional style depth, but I am also kind of talking about gameplay depth as well. But the basic idea is that you have a series of levels, and in each level you have to solve different puzzles and defeat different enemies, and at the end of each level you'll get taken to the next level, and everything that you collect carries over. So any weapons that you find, all the midi packs that you'll use, they carry over between levels. So if you go through the first level and not find anything, then those things will be missing from your inventory in the second level, and it continues on like that. And that's a very good thing that games don't really do much these days, because games these days are so focused on resetting things all the time with your health regenerating and all that sort of stuff. But I remember playing this demo, which is this second level of the game after the caves, and you do have these different puzzles where you have to go through different watery paths and you have to push blocks to reach ledges and hit switches to open doors. It's all very interesting. But I did play the actual game, the non-demo version, and I didn't complete it, but I think I got quite far. Well, actually what happened is I did get quite a few levels in, and then I came back to the game many years later, and I think I may have gotten a few levels further. But it's one of those games where there are things that really sort of, I think, stick out. Like, one of the things that used to scare me as a kid was there's a level where you have the hand of Midas, and if you know the story behind Midas, he touched things and whatever he touched turned to gold. And so there's one part where there's this stone hand, and if you step on top of the hand, you turn to gold, and that used to scare me. And there's also this stage, St. Francis's Folly, where you have all of these different rooms based on different, like, Norse gods and different mythologies and different stories. So you'll have the Thor room, where there's this giant hammer, and you have to dodge the lightning and find your way around there. And there's also this area where you'll have all these boulders rolling for Atlas, and for Damocles you'll have all these swords that fall from the roof. But I very much remember there was this level where you sort of have this upper and lower level. So you'll have the ground floor at the bottom, and then above that you'll have all these pillars, and there's these paths that go above that ground. And the level is about controlling different levels of water, so you can raise and lower the water, which you'll need to do in order to get from and to different places. Kind of like the water temple in Ocarina of Time, which, as I mentioned, was my favourite level in that game. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. What I think made this easier than Tomb Raider 3, for example, is that the save crystals, you couldn't carry them around with you. You could only use them on the spot that you found them, which on the surface you may think to yourself, well, that makes it harder because you don't have a choice. But no, it actually makes it easier because the game isn't giving you the responsibility to know the right times when to save. The game is guiding you, saying, right, this is a bit where you will need to save. But each save spot can only be used once, so there is still that element of judging in that regards, and I think that for that game I prefer that system. I think I enjoyed that particular system more. Although saying that, if I was to get good at Tomb Raider 3, get good, then I would be able to more effectively use the save crystals. So there's that argument, I suppose. But whatever, really. The one thing that I didn't like about this game in terms of Tomb Raider is I didn't really like the enemies so much, because especially the humans, I don't know what it was, but the first Tomb Raider game seemed to have this philosophy that humans can't die, or you can't kill humans, because the way that humans worked was that you'd shot them, or you'd shoot them, if I could get my words out in the correct tense. You would shoot them and they would never die, but they would like run behind a pillar, and then they just wouldn't pop out. They just like disappear forever. It's like you'd be shooting this guy and then he just runs around and then he goes behind the pillar and then he's gone. Very strange. But, you know, people like to complain about, ooh, the controls are really hard, it's really awkward. But I think the controls are fine. I mean, these days we have like Assassin's Creed. I can't control that, you know? I find this much easier.